Well, most of my volunteering now, when I started and here 22 years later, has been involved with the gardens. We have an heirloom seed bank. We have one of the largest heirloom seed banks east of the Mississippi. We specialize in 19th and when we can get them 18th century garden and field crops that the German and Swiss immigrants might have grown, or preferably did grow, if we can document that.
Damn.
Well, honestly, I don't know that there is a typical day. I started in 1999. Most of my time has been spent in the gardens. And I have also spent 2.5 years working full-time down at the settlement farm, which is the 1750s era. I have interpreted several of the buildings over time, led bus tours, so I'm your quintessential jack of all trades and master of none of them. But most of my time is spent in the gardens. I would say they're the same. The most challenging and the best for me were the same, and that was the 2.5 years I had the Pennsylvania Conservation Corps crew. I had no more than five disadvantaged young people, disadvantaged either financially or difficult home lives or something, between the ages of 16 and 26. We were in costume. We interpreted the settlement farm from the 1750s. We worked the fields. They were really thrilled about that, you can imagine. And dressed in costume and took tour groups, arranged games for some of the school groups that came through. We did that for a couple years. Tamed one of the lambs, who then we could lead around on a leash. The little kids really enjoyed that. And dealing with all of the teenagers' problems, home life issues, goals, all of that. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, and also what I would say is among the most rewarding things I've done. Well, I started out with the gardens because I like working outside. I like plants, and one thing about gardens is no 2 days are the same. It's seasonally, so things change constantly. I stayed with it because a lot of the volunteers, especially years ago when we had even more volunteers, know so much more about gardens and gardening. I got to know master gardeners. I learned a lot. I got interested in history for the first time because of the gardens and then because of working in other aspects. And I just kept learning. And so it was never old. Well, to tell you the truth, at my age, all the bending and stooping and kneeling in the gardens keeps me from going home and sitting and doing nothing. And that really, it sounds like I'm joking, but it has an effect. I have to get up. I have physical things I need to do. I have people who are expecting me to show up. Other people, even older than I am, who are showing up and doing more. And that's one of the benefits. That and what I've learned about American history since I've been here, which I had no interest in before. And now I've read everything I can get my hands on in the last 20 years because of the museum. I volunteered for a lot of different organizations since I retired and moved back to Lancaster County. This is the one I've stayed with. This is the one that has been the most pleasant, the most educational, and the most cohesive set of volunteers that I've ever worked with. So I would say that. Oh, for one thing, I hope they understand how much their ancestors had to work to carve out farms and villages in this wilderness. It really was a wilderness. And the different farms that we have, the hotel, the village, I think shows that over centuries how much work was done. And the fact that history here on the East Coast is so oriented towards the English. But a third of the settlers who came here in the 18th century and 19th century were Germans and Swiss. And the American population is still 1/3 German ancestry. And that gets lost because they assimilated so well. It's not like we gave up the culture, but it's just not so much on the surface, and we'd get not so much notice. So I'd like the visitors, especially from out of state, to recognize the English aren't the only ones, the Spanish in the West aren't the only ones who had a major impact. Oh my, if I knew the right words, I would say them, because we need more young people here. We really need more young people. And the museum isn't in a position to hire a huge amount of staff, which we used to have, I understand, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And we need a variety of ages. We used to have a shoemaker who brought his whole family, and they interpreted one of the farms, and the boys apprenticed with their father in the shoe shop. That showed a picture of life that we retirees really cannot show to the same extent. Family life would be a big blessing to show on the site, and we don't have the people to do it. I would also think history majors, drama majors, German majors would get a lot of background information and maybe find aspects of their own fields of study that they don't really recognize at the moment. And we could get them a lot more involved. And then we have the craftsmen that they could apprentice with, and I don't think very many people know that we have that. So we have a lot of opportunities for young people that they never even get to see. For example, I had one girl who I won't even describe the things that happened to her, the abuse that happened to her when she was a child, when she was a teenager, ran away from home when she was 13. She had been in foster care, returned to her mother, ran away from home when she was 15, came to work through her high school with the Conservation Corps when she was 16. And it was the first time, and this was a surprise to me, the first time in her life she ever worked with boys who treated her like just another crew member instead of as an object. She wore costumes, so whatever clothing she was used to wearing, or appropriate, inappropriate, that was gone. She was in costume. She relaxed, and she discovered she had a real gift for tools. The girl learned to knit, and I'm not exaggerating, in 30 minutes. In a few days, she taught herself to mend and fix the floor loom that we have down at the settlement farm. And she was just outstanding with carpenter tools that she'd never used before. She was one of the tool guys that I had and counted on. And if I could have kept her longer, I would have, and it would have done her a lot of good. She's one example. I had several who really had kind of lost their way, who were in work-study programs because they couldn't finish high school as a strictly academic situation. I had one boy who was so affected by his home life and some drug situations he'd gotten into when he was 14 and 15 that he would go to high school the first period just to get his emotional support teachers to calm him down. And then he'd come here and work. And he was fabulous. Looked great in costume, interpreted the third day he was on the grounds. He had found his home. So I think I'm really sorry the state has eliminated that program. Well, I started out as a high school teacher, so it wasn't totally foreign. I spent 20 years in the Army, so I had some difficult teenage experience before that, and I have gone back to teaching at the college level since I retired. So it's not like I was walking and stepping off a cliff, but I never had that many mental illnesses and emotional problems and financial issues all concentrated in 5 people. Even as the 5 people turned over in the course of those 2.5 years, I still had a concentration of clashing problems and clashing issues that the kids had to learn to work as a team. That was the biggest issue and the biggest reward.